Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing Captain Marvel, the 21st film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the first of 3 Marvel films to be released this year. Then we'll be asking, what other possibilities arise from digital de-aging, as this film features a much sprier Samuel L. Jackson than his nearly 80 years would have you believe. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, other recent exciting superhero stuff, I've been watching Umbrella Academy on Netflix. The new series based on the Dark Horse comic by Gerard Way and Gabrielle Barr. And this stars Ellen Page, Robert Sheehan, aka Nathan from Misfits, which was a nice moment for me as I really liked him on that show. And also, for fans of British sci-fi, one of the lead characters is played by Tom Hopper, who was another one of the background knights in Merlin. So, between that and last week's Night Flyers, which featured a different one of the background knights in Merlin in a main role, apparently it's their time. The Knights of the Round Table are rising up and taking on Hollywood. Good for you, lads. And yeah, I haven't seen Night Flyers, but Tom Hopper's pretty good in this.
Cool, sounds like a good show. I've been wanting to watch it for a while. Yeah, might even get stuck into it this weekend. It's got quite a lot of buzz. I know it's something that Netflix has been pushing quite hard, but I've seen through Twitter and water cooler conversations that it seems to have sort of resonated with an audience that's beyond the normal sort of, very geeky audience for things like, Netflix comic adaptations like Punisher or Daredevil. So it seems to have a broader appeal.
Yeah, it seems, if anything, to have gone down better for the people I know who are outside the hardcore demographic who have read the comics than with the people who had, because it's basically hang on, I should probably explain the actual plot very vaguely without spoilers. It's about a family who used to be a group of sort of kid superheroes and have grown up to become a bunch of fuck-ups, basically. There's a sudden ticking apocalypse threat, and there's them having to reunite and argue about their various family dysfunctions because their father has recently died. And yeah, in the comics it was quite off the wall and quick and wacky, lots of strange things being thrown at you very quickly. And the Netflix show is, you may be shocked to hear because it's a Netflix show, more a sort of long dialogue scenes, heavy angst, family drama type thing. It is done fairly well as that, but it's not as strange as the comics was. But it seems to have found its audience, so fair enough. It's quite fun. I can see why people who liked the comics might feel it hasn't entirely captured the feeling of it. But it has got a lot of the same ideas in it. They just come at you a lot slower.
Sounds like an interesting thing there. They're kind of exploring this family dynamic. There's, some more complex, personal and interpersonal conflicts going on in this show.
I don't know, I guess it's a very sort of standard telly show setup. I mean, you could argue it's basically 6 Feet Under with superheroes. In fact, considering the sort of grim, slightly morbid vibe to some of it, that's not a million miles away, although they don't go quite as far with the total misery as 6 Feet Under does.
So, sounds good. Yeah, no, I've been wanting to see it, and Ellen Page is very good in a lot of the things that she's in, and yeah, it's nice to see that the knights from Merlin have been hired. I guess post Game of Thrones, is there a scramble to hire every British actor for something because they have gravitas or something like that?
I don't know, yeah, some combination of Game of Thrones and Hugh Laurie on House and Andrew Lincoln on Walking Dead seems to have reminded America that there's a load of actors over here who have done quite a lot of work and are probably quite good, and their audience aren't already familiar with, so they can, find these hot, new, experienced people and not have to worry about them not knowing what they're doing. So yeah, there seems to be an ongoing gold rush for everyone who was in a British show in, the last 10 years, which is good news for the British acting industry and their mortgage payments, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess with the internet, everything that means that, a small British show like Merlin can get picked up, or get fans on the internet, even if it's not shown through BBC Worldwide or BBC America. And, that means that these kind of cult British shows that wouldn't have spread beyond Britain in the past can get more of a following.
Yeah, something like that. Even though it has, if anything, it prefigured the current superhero craze by about 5 years, but I think Misfits has a small sort of cult following in the US, so hopefully they too are happy to see Robert Sheehan on screen again. I certainly was. I assume he's been working, because he seems to be still pretty good and still around, but he's not done any sort of big genre parts, so I haven't really seen him in anything since he stopped playing Nathan. I don't know if you watched Misfits, so this may not be something you can really delve into with me.
I didn't watch Misfits, but everyone says how good it was. I do feel like I missed out on something.
It was good for about 2 or 3 seasons, and then it dived off a bit of a cliff, but those 2 or 3 seasons were really good. It hit the British show problem of it just kept losing cast members at a conspicuous rate, and replacing them with not as interesting ones.
That tends to happen.
Yeah, sad but true. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. Alistair, what about you?
Well, I've been watching the new Alan Partridge TV show, which is called This Time with Alan Partridge. As anyone who knows me well will testify, I'm a very big Alan Partridge fan. I love all his previous outings, the film Alpha Papa from a few years ago, the sort of internet-based show he did, Mid-Morning Matters, all the classic Partridge stuff, such as, The Day to Day, Know Me, Knowing You, I'm Alan Partridge. So I'm a big Partridge fan, and so I was interested and a little nervous to see that they were bringing Alan Partridge back to the BBC. Yeah, and this show, I've been enjoying it so far. That's why I'm recommending it in this segment. It's kind of a weird hybrid of some of the shows they've done before, probably closest to the Mid-Morning Matters. So the original Partridge TV shows like Day to Day and Know Me, Knowing You, for anyone who's not seen them before, is the idea is you watch like a fake TV show, like Know Me, Knowing You was a chat show, and you watched it as if it was an actual show where everything went disastrously wrong. And then they did more straight-up sitcoms later, like I'm Alan Partridge, when it's just, you're not supposed to be watching like a show, you're seeing, I guess, from like a kind of, invisible, omniscient camera position. There's probably a technical term to describe what this is that's escaping me, but you just follow Alan Partridge as he tries to get onto TV. But this show is kind of a mix of both in that you're watching this fictional magazine show called This Time that they've come up with this, but like when they cut away to segments or have sort of short breaks, your view as the viewer stays on set, so you get to see what's going on like behind the scenes or around the show, which means they can bring in characters like Lynn, Alan's assistant, who obviously wouldn't be in the actual show themselves. So it's an interesting kind of mix of the two. Yeah, it's funny so far. I'd say it's not as funny as maybe some of the classic Partridge shows, like, I'm Alan Partridge, which are just like sort of side-splittingly funny. But Steve Coogan is very good playing, I guess, his greatest role, the role he'll always be remembered for, Alan Partridge. Yeah, it's got its moments. There's a funny bit in the first episode when an interview goes wrong and then the interviewer storms off and Alan Partridge follows him into a lift and is trying to interview him in this lift that stops kind of painfully at every floor while the guy's trying to storm out. So it's got its moments, and we've only had 2 episodes, so, it's got potential to go good places.
Yep, I too have watched both the first 2 episodes of this, and yeah, it's pretty fun. I'm not as big a hardcore Partridge fan as Alistair, but I always enjoy seeing him. There's something deliciously relatable yet unbearable. I think it's the real sort of pivot point of the cringe with Alan Partridge. You can always sort of see where he's coming from, but there's always also the total awareness that, unlike him apparently, you can see the situation he's in and realise that there's no way he should do what he's clearly about to do. Yeah. I liked the second episode of the new series. I mean, to be honest, I'm not recommending picking and choosing at this point. You might as well just watch them all. But I thought the second episode featured for some reason, my favourite Partridge moments, which is where he gets really sort of huffily jealous and superficially petty towards some person who he thinks is taking his spotlight or dissing him in some subtle way. And of course the funny part is, on some level, a lot of them often kind of are, which just actually makes it funnier when he then realises that. There's a bit with him and another possible guest presenter with a big perm who it's just quite funny. And there was a lot of sketchy bits, like him meeting a bloke in the audience who travels hundreds of miles across the country to come to each taping of this really, really punishingly generic, boring-looking BBC magazine show. It's fun. As you say, I'm interested to see what sort of, awful logical conclusion they build it to. Like, there's some stuff at the end of the second episode, which I don't know if that was just a one-off joke or the beginning of some sort of subplot. Alan Partridge in the era of harassment allegations, but who knows? Yeah,
they do a good job sometimes also of, like, creating characters who are sometimes more dislikable than Alan Partridge, so when he's kind of, like, jealous of them, you kind of feel some sympathy for him. What also I like about what they've done with the character over the years is that they have purposely had him mellow as he gets older, rather than sort of stay the same, which makes him feel more like a real person, as he's been doing. I don't know, when did the Day to Day come out? This character might have been around for more than 20 years, and obviously he's changed over time, which I think does really help give the character some longevity. Younger Alan Partridge was just angry about young people and being this quite angry conservative guy, and that he sort of mellowed, and now he's more relaxed about the modern world. He just doesn't quite get it, but he tries in sort of the wrong way, and he's less kind of uptight and loses his shit less when something goes wrong. So I kind of like the fact they've given the characters a broad arc across all these shows over, like, say, 20 years or something.
It is weird, but yeah, over the course of basically our entire adult lives, Alan Partridge has been there. slowly growing through society. I'm excited to see what... I mean, I don't know, it always seems a bit pissy to say just as there's someone started their new thing. I'm excited to see what they do next. But yeah, I'm excited to see where they leave him, I guess, at the end in this run. If there's potential for more of this, or more of a similar format, or if this is just going to be one glorious flame out.
Apparently, the BBC has said they're going to do more Partridge after this show, although it's not clear if they're going to do a second series of this time with Alan Partridge, or they'll do some kind of other Alan Partridge-based TV show. I guess it depends on how they end this time with Alan Partridge, if it has like a really definite conclusion. Just as like Knowing Me, Knowing You had a very definite conclusion.
It's quite a restricted format, I guess. You don't want to, I can see how they might get to the end of the this time joke by the end of one series and feel that there's space to take him into a different format. I mean, God only knows what it would be, but some kind of different format. Make him the host of live election night coverage or something. That'll be fun.
Yeah, or they might decide to go back to a more straightforward sitcom like I'm Alan Partridge, or some of the recent books they've done have been more like that. They're kind of less meta. It wouldn't surprise me if they did more of this second series of this show. If it doesn't end in a sort of conclusive way, that means they can't possibly do more. But they have apparently, BBC has said they will do more Partridge. So if you're enjoying this, then that's good. There's more to come. If you're a big Partridge fan but have been unsure about this, I'd certainly recommend watching it because they're consistent in the quality.
But I haven't noticed much extreme backlash against it, so I suspect most big Partridge fans are probably watching.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And now we're going to talk about Captain Marvel, the 21st film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the first one to feature a solo female lead. And no, those are not two stats, but sound amazing together, but, let's, for now, just embrace the fact they bothered to do it at all, and say, yes, this is a film starring Brie Larson as the character Veers, who is a soldier in the Kree Empire, who are in the middle of some sort of interstellar war with the Skrulls, a species of shape-changers, who ends up crashing down to Earth after an altercation with the Skrulls, meeting up with Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, although a youngified version of Samuel L. Jackson via digital technology, because it turns out this film takes place in the mid-90s. And then they go on a little adventure. As it turns out, Veers does not just look like the Earth-based Brie Larson, but she actually has some roots on the planet as well. So yes, we have seen this film. Alistair, what did you think of it?
I'd say this is a good, solid summer blockbuster action film. Disney and Marvel, it will be of no surprise to anyone, can make a competent, entertaining film. So this is certainly, you pay your £10 and you get, 2 hours worth of action, adventure and entertainment. So it's good in terms of that it achieves the goal of being entertaining. I came out to the cinema feeling like, that was great. That was like a roller coaster. It had its highs, it had its lows. Yeah, it made me feel entertained, which is what you want from, like I say, your big early spring blockbuster. They had some absolutely spectacular fight scenes and action sequences, especially towards the end. As a big sort of sci-fi fan, especially big like space opera sci-fi fan, I'm quite on board for alien soldiers, laser battles in space. Which other people's mileage and that may vary, but I quite liked that whole aesthetic. It was kind of Stargate SG-1 in the fact that they were Air Force pilots in a sort of sci-fi adventure, although with a much bigger budget. And it obviously had the standard Joss Whedon-esque kind of Marvel sprinklings on top, like there was lots of good jokes. There was a very funny cat character, which I'm sure we'll come back to. Brie Larson was excellent, and obviously for someone who grew up in the 90s, there was like bucket loads of 90s nostalgia. So it's overall, I guess it's a good package, and it's a good blockbuster.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty decent. A lot of fun to be had in individual scenes. I found it started a bit slowly. I don't know, maybe this is the bit you went for more than me due to your grounding in the zappy sci-fi battle genre, but there was an introductory 20 minutes set while the lead character, Veers, was a soldier in the Kree army battling against the Skrulls. I found that bit a bit of a slow introduction. It was the sort of bit that felt like generic backstory filling, which you could see why Black Panther did it in one quick montage. Yes, it might have been a bit on the nose exposition, but it gets it out of the way so you can get into the actual narrative. And it kind of felt like we were kind of waiting to get into the actual narrative until she crashed down to Earth and the fun started.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Black Panther had the advantage of like lots of the backstory is filled in Captain America Civil War. And I think if they had introduced his character in, Avengers Infinity War, then that might have sort of cushioned the impact of this film a bit. I do agree with you that I think the opening could have been shorter. Like the film really got going when it introduced Earth, even first of all in a sort of flashback bit, and then when she actually like arrived on Earth. I do think there's the opening kind of 10, 15 minutes has this plot when they've got to rescue this Kree spy, which I kind of felt that giving her like a whole mission on the beginning of the film before we get to the plot did mean it kind of had quite a slow start and there was quite a sort of a slow run up to it, which, yeah, I think it would have been better if they ditched that. Like, when I was watching it, there's a kind of the first scene that takes place on Earth, which is, I think, technically a flashback, is when there's like kind of big hangar doors swing open and you see an aircraft that becomes a sort of plot MacGuffin. And I think that was just really spectacular. And I kind of thought, oh, you should have opened with that, like the doors of this hangar opening. So yeah, possibly slow start, but then there was plenty of like lots of nice sci-fi action scenes in the middle and the end. So I think I'd be fine without having them right at the beginning.
Again, the fact that the lead character, Brie Larson, who I guess we should call Veers, even though her identity shifts a bit throughout the film, which always makes this a bit confusing, is, I don't think she really starts coming into her own until she gets to Earth, I think, and she generates this sort of steely, charming energy that somehow sits between Thor and Captain America. She's confident she knows what the right thing is, but she's a bit more endearingly cocky about it. But at the same time, she's not obviously as much of a cackling buffoon as Thor is. So yeah, there's something different and new about that character, which I think is going to be good going forward to actually add something to the endless pantheon of Marvel characters. And yeah, she bounces well off Nick Fury, who, because the Brie Larson character is relatively serious a lot of the time, does mean he gets to do a lot of the comic relief fun parts. It's weird, Samuel L. Jackson getting to do so much emoting and being so funny, even though he's basically a pixel ghost. I mean, that might be exaggerating slightly, but yeah, it's one of these things which you notice a bit when he first appears, and then forget about it again after a couple of scenes, and then think back to it again afterwards, thinking like, wow, in a lot of ways he was barely even there, but it seemed fine during the film.
I think Samuel L. Jackson has enough charisma to pull it off, in that he's always very, very watchable, even though, yeah, it is slightly uncanny how digitally de-aged he has become. He definitely looks very different to the Samuel L. Jackson that we know. I mean, he does really look like Samuel L. Jackson from kind of 90s action movies, which is when this is set. I'm probably sure some algorithm somewhere in the vast Disney computer system has been force-fed a lot of Samuel Jackson footage from the 90s in order to get down the machine learning enough to make this digital de-aging look convincing, which it does. I mean, I think when you get into the film, like, especially there's a quite good action sequence, and I guess in kind of about a third of the way in, Brie Larson and Samuel Jackson's character have to infiltrate this Air Force base. And when you get into the action scenes, you kind of completely forget that this is a sort of, I don't know, yeah, as you say, pixel ghost Samuel Jackson. When he first appears, you're like, wow, he looks different. It's not helped by the fact the most recently we saw him in Glass when they made him look deliberately older as well.
Yeah, I think I was mostly just surprised and impressed, how present he actually was. Like, with a lot of all CGI characters, you sometimes get the feeling they're slightly minimising how much they actually do with them to save money. But no, he was there the whole time, like he was a real character. Fake de-aged Samuel L. Jackson. Yeah, there was a sort of convincing emotional journey for Captain Marvel, and then there was a sort of ongoing, basically comic relief Samuel L. Jackson, and that sort of kept the film bopping along until Carol Danvers herself re-emerged from the Veers persona in towards the end of the film. I guess I should probably refrain from spoiling it in detail, but yes, the amnesia stuff does eventually mostly end, and sort of cuts loose properly and starts chuckling and laughing and really enjoying being a superhero, which is in a similar way to, I think, what we've said about Wonder Woman when talking about Gal Gadot's playing Wonder Woman. It's a very similar vibe to that, really, to sort of, I'm just enjoying this thing. And it is, again, an infectious thing which makes the character stand out a little from other superheroes. I guess, again, it's arguably a bit Thor-y, but it's a good vibe.
Yeah, certainly. I think they kind of plotted out the film and the character very well. I do like how the kind of crucial bits of character development happen at the same sort of time as like key plot development. Like there's a bit in kind of the middle of the film when, I'm going to avoid spoilers for people who haven't seen it, the Carol Danvers stroke Veers meets some old friends of hers from Earth and kind of finds out more about the person that she was. And at the same time, there's a twist in the sort of ongoing action plot, and it kind of works well that they both happen at the same time. There's this crucial bit in the middle of the film when the character gets like knowledge. That's in a lot of dramatic arcs for films or novels or whatever. There's kind of a bit in the middle when the character has to receive some crucial knowledge that helps them complete their mission or solve whatever the quest is. And in this, the character receives, well, there's a twist, so that's a revealing knowledge about the kind of overall action plot, but also learns something about herself and the person she used to be. So they really handle that moment of, gaining knowledge at the core of the film, which I liked. And I did like how the main plot arc sort of personal development for the Veers stroke Carol Danvers character is a kind of a journey of self-discovery. She's trying to find out the person that she is. They didn't feel the need to put in anything like a romance plot line for character development or anything like that. It's just, one woman on a journey to find out who she really is, which works really well. Yeah, my only criticism in terms of like the dramatic structure was that a bit after that, which is supposed to be kind of like the low point, the point when it looks like all is lost, and then the character must kind of pull themselves together and decide to keep on fighting and ultimately triumph. But that beat, don't think they kind of nailed very well. It's one sometimes they don't hit so well in these 12A moderate fantasy violence action films. Yep, drink. Got the name in there.
Yep. Yeah, that was rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
It wasn't rubbish, to be fair. It was in some ways a nice bit for Carol, but it didn't really feel like all was lost. It felt like another momentary threat for the hero to overcome.
Yeah, it's kind of fleeting that it sort of passes. And it's the same problem we identified with Aquaman, which is there's a brief moment of he was like...
It was better than the one in Aquaman.
He was like, oh man, I think I've lost the will to carry on. No, carry on, Aquaman. Oh, all right then. Thanks for this pep talk. Maybe it's a reason why in these 12A, like I say, action films, they don't go heavy on the kind of orders lost moment because people feel like, I don't know, it's not, the tone doesn't work, or I don't know, the sort of younger people, like maybe a 10-year-old that's got into a 12A might find it too emotional.
I mean, you don't have to have them, sobbing in the bath, questioning their very will to live, but I feel like you could probably still have a bit more of an, oh dear, the hero's going to get got, or oh dear.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem, really. Maybe they should shift a bit back more towards the hero is dead or trapped or about to be beaten up, rather than trying to pull off some sort of moment of intense emotional agony for those of us who want to feel sad.
Yeah, all the villain is about to achieve in their goal.
It's true, it's possible this film could have used a stronger, more present villain or villain master plan.
Yeah.
The actual plot the threat, I guess, sort of ticked along at quite a low level. There was attempts to escalate it, but it wasn't very present, really.
Yeah. I think I've got more to say on this, but it'd probably be spoilery, so I think it's maybe fair to say at this point, we recommend this film. If you've not seen it, go see it, and there'll be some spoilers from this point on.
Yeah, it's a decent superhero origin film, as I say. Solidly sort of middle to upper middle tier on the big Marvel chart. But that's not, that much of a diss, if only because most of the Marvel films, except for the ones everyone always criticises, like 4-2, are mostly pretty decent. So yeah, it's another strong to decent Marvel film.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. So there'll be spoilers from this point on. So just to get right in it with the spoilers, so last chance to skip ahead. The segment times are in the show notes. So the main twist, obviously, in this film, which is, I wouldn't say telegraphed, but I was one that I was kind of expecting, was that the Skrulls aren't the bad guys, and the kind of the Kree, the Veers character's race, are sort of the bad guys, and her mentor figure, Yon-Rog, played by Jude Law. Yon-Rog does possibly sound like a brand of Icelandic yogurt. But Jude Law, the mentor figure, turns out to be the big arch villain.
Did kind of see that coming.
Yeah, I did kind of see that coming.
The moment he first appeared in the film.
Yeah, because he doesn't play the character with, like I say, the same kind of lovable Jude Law charm he has in, the Sherlock films. He does play this character more as a sort of edgy, sort of slightly unpleasant, sort of mean soldier figure, which sort of works in that he's supposed to be the leader of this Star Force space military unit, and I guess part of her growth story is kind of like stepping out from his shadow and overcoming her mentor. So it does work, and also it sticks to one thing, one of my rules for doing a 12A moderate fantasy violent action movie, which is you should put your best, or at least a very, very good actor, as your main villain, because the hero part is usually kind of just being good and likable. The villain requires usually some kind of nuanced acting to come across as a believable villain, and also talented actors do really well also sometimes camping it up as ridiculous villains. We've had some good examples, all of which have run out of my brain right now. One that really jumps out, Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther, probably best actor in that film. That's a good good example, things like that. So getting Jude Law into the villain role, I think, was a good bit of maneuvering, because you want your villain at the end to be kind of someone who can deliver a good villain monologue bit at the end, rather than, as much as I thought Ben Mendelsohn was good as the Skrull villain. Villains with basically a rubber mask on, not great at acting.
I thought he was very good, actually, for a guy who spent a lot of the film in a rubber mask.
Yeah, and he did have a bit, actually, when he transformed into a human character when he got to act, minus the rubber mask. But yeah, I kind of maneuvering Jude Law into the central villain thing kind of works quite well. They didn't really have a great villain plot, as you say. There was no moment when Jude Law's character's like, haha, now I will complete my evil mission, when he didn't really have one other than just killing the Skrulls.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say he turned up and started killing Skrulls, but then again, I'm assuming that it wasn't that he was pretending not to kill Skrulls when Veers knew him before. It's just that she didn't realise that Skrulls were people too, which, I don't know, I guess Veers is hardcore military and this just never occurred to her. But yeah, it's not a bad storyline. As you say, Jude Law is quite charismatic and gives it a good shot. It was just quite obvious. Maybe it's just because I've watched at least 2 or 3 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in which the Kree are mostly evil was drummed into me quite hard. So when it turns out that the Empire who Veers was working for were the Kree, I was a bit sort of, okay, I'm going to assume she's going to be becoming disillusioned with them fairly quickly.
Well, it's the sort of plot arc they go with sort of a 12A action movie. It does really say that's kind of the difference, I think, between a PG action movie and a 12A action movie, is that a 12A will have some kind of sense of moral or personal growth for the character. They'll have a thing like, the authority isn't always right kind of thing, which is basically kind of what this film is saying. Is that like, just because your boss or your leader says these people are bad guys, you must kill them, doesn't necessarily mean it's always right. Whereas like a PG film, I think will be more straight up, like kind of, here are the good guys, they're the bad guys, we must beat them. It's kind of the difference between YA and middle grade fiction.
Yeah.
As I heard in a podcast, and I can't remember which podcast it is to give credit to the person who said this. It might have been Writing Excuses, which is a good podcast about writers. When they say kind of middle grade fiction is usually very much about fitting in. The plot is like you must kind of fit in with the world you're in, which is kind of a thing to teach younger kids. Like you need to kind of be a part of culture because in order to relate to other people. And then YA fiction is the opposite, which is you need to be yourself, you need to stand out, which is the first thing. Like you teach people you need to fit in and relate to other people, and then you say, but don't just become part of the swarm, or you must maintain your individuality. And just because all of society says something's right doesn't mean it is right if it's clearly morally wrong. So I think that's kind of the key difference between, I don't see very many PG action movies. I'm trying to think of one now that's very much kind of like goodies and baddies. I don't know, like Power Rangers, we reviewed a couple of years ago. Obviously a film completely lacking nuance.
It's true. There was some morally ambiguous bull wanking, but the actual
I forgot about that.
The actual goody baddie conflict was quite simple.
Yeah, so that's a classic kind of, we're the good guys, there's a bad guy coming to defeat us, we must defeat them. Whereas what this film does, which quite a lot of the Marvel films do, because they're all, like I say, 12A, moderate fantasy violence action movies. I did it again, 2 times 1 episode. Yeah. They have a moment like the good guys aren't necessarily the good guys. Winter Soldier does it. This film does it. A
lot of that has been traced to the mighty Marvel formula perfected by Stan Lee, God rest his soul. A high quality Stan Lee tribute at the start of this film, by the way. A+, well done.
Yeah, that was very sweet.
And also his cameo in which he's reading his lines for Bullvats, which...
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, that was him. That was what he was reading. He had the Bullvats script.
Just to sidebar for a minute on this. The Stan Lee cameo is, he's on a tram that there's a fight sequence on, which is in the trailer. And he's, I guess, an actor rehearsing for an audition, I guess, because he's reading from a script. I didn't realise that was his Mallrats line. I thought it was maybe a reference to like a 90s sitcom that was popular in America that went over my head.
I stress I have not memorised the script of Mallrats. I just noticed because he was reading a booklet that said Mallrats on it in enormous letters.
I missed that.
That was a reference to Stan Lee's Mallrats cameo being in continuity, I guess. I saw a tweet from Kevin Smith looking actually quite emotional at this having happened.
So I guess that's supposed to be the actual Stan Lee then? I suppose the others are just kind of...
I feel we should disappear down the cosmic black hole of trying to work out the continuity of Stan Lee's Marvel cameos. But yes, that could be the actual Stan Lee.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, as you were saying about the moral arc of Captain Marvel.
Yes, the general Marvel thing, as perfected by Stan Lee in the 60s, has always been the heroes are fallible, the heroes are people, the heroes make mistakes. Spider-Man gets his powers and then makes a series of decisions that results in the death of his uncle. That was what, immediately made Marvel pull ahead of DC in the our heroes are cooler and more relatable stakes. So yeah, there's always that sense of sort of moral ambiguity. It's not just goodies and baddies. It has always been there, or at least has always meant to be kind of there.
Yeah. They always have that, are we the baddies moment? Yeah.
Yeah, so every comic features the moment where Peter Parker pulls on his Nazi costume and says, am I the baddie?
Yeah. Well, there is that kind of moment. It was like, so with the guys with all the armor and the bombers and the big guns, and we're hunting these guys who mainly seem to run away from us. And are we possibly the evil empire? And like they're the kind of war-torn refugees who are just trying to live.
I mean, it seems obvious when you put it that way, but
Yeah.
Captain Marvel was very confused about the nature of herself, so it took a while to figure it out.
Yeah, but I think it works really well. Like I say, there's a bit in the middle of the film when she discovers who she is by meeting her human friends when she was an Air Force pilot. And at the same time, she discovers about herself, but also discovers more about the wider universe, which is a relatable thing, like I say, for a film that's primarily pitched at teenagers and things like that. This idea that you're discovering the person who you are, as well as discovering kind of the more complex nature of the world, is a sort of relatable character journey.
The whole amnesia thing, which you have to sort of half wonder if when Marvel sit down to plan a new superhero origin, the first thing they say is, right, okay, we need to in some way make this different from the increasingly standard story of once upon a time there was an every person, and then they stumbled across a thing or glowing object or bit of technology that gave them powers.
Yeah.
And then they had some sort of moral object lesson, such as the aforementioned uncle murder, and then they became a superhero. And, we have to somehow mix this up and give the review something to say other than, yes, it's another Marvel origin. And, this time they've settled on this sort of amnesiac angle, which, although there has been a bit of messing with her head and questioning her memories in the past, isn't directly borrowed from any specific comic, I don't think. It's a way of making this film seem a little less like a generic Marvel origin, and I think it possibly makes it a bit shonky and weird at times, but at the same time it's at least something different. It gives it this weird vibe where instead of the character immediately leaping in to charm you like they often do, it sort of builds towards her finally really exploding out into herself at the end of this journey of self-discovery, which leads to a weird feeling where almost the most exhilarating cool part of a Marvel film is the last act rather than the first two like it normally is. I mean, I still think the action sequence at the end goes on for a bit long, like they always seem to. Sometimes Marvel seem like they're getting a bit of a handle on this, but no, I felt like this one did have a final action scene that maybe banged on a little. But they are well choreographed action scenes, so I feel bad complaining too much. Yeah,
I liked the fact that basically the film's structure was non-linear. If you were to recut this film so that everything happened in the order that it happens to Veers, the first event pretty much, other than a few kind of bits that in her childhood, which are obviously flashbacks in the films, the kind of first major scene would be her getting her superpowers, her origin scene. And I think you're right that Disney and Marvel have quite cleverly learned that, okay, get away from films when, okay, the first act is them stumbling over something and becoming a superhero. The second act is then them having a moral lesson. The third act is the point when they learn something. The fourth act is, et cetera, et cetera. So they've shaken up the format a bit. Like, say, they've got away from, like, opening of origin stories in films like Black Panther or the new Spider-Man movie because they realised people don't want to sit through endless origins. And the way they've done it in this is that they want to explain where her powers come from, unlike, say, Spider-Man or Black Panther when it's sort of been done for you. But like this, so they went for a non-linear structure, and the way they do that is like, we'll give the character amnesia, so you can tell her in essence linear story, which begins with the mission, the spy mission, and goes through to ultimately defeating her former mentor, but also fill in all the stuff that's happened before that, the superhero origin stuff, through flashbacks and things like that are revealed through uncovering this nostalgia. I think as a piece of writing, it works quite well to get around the obvious issue of we don't want the opening of the film just to be another plucky every person character gets caught in an accident with a weird bit of alien tech and then becomes a superhero. For me, I think that kind of worked. And in terms of like the action scene at the end going on too long, I think, yeah, you're right. It does have the issue that some, which we've talked about in the podcast before, that some superhero movies have, Marvel ones, which is at the end, they go outwards and make the kind of the canvas bigger, which I think is a mistake. At the end, you should kind of make the canvas smaller and come in to distill the key drama of your film down to a conflict between two characters, usually, like the best action movie.
Fair to much as I mildly criticised them, that is kind of what they did.
Yeah. The main action bit at the end is sort of, she gets her powers, she's zipping around in space, blowing up all the bombers sent by Ronan, the villain from Guardians of the Galaxy, which I guess was a nice way to loop in the wider Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then that's kind of the action climax of the film, which is very much expanding out to a bigger canvas. But then I did really like, after that, when this is definitely spoilery, but we've given the spoiler warning, she comes down to Earth, and then there's the Jude Law character, and it's basically like, okay, this is the bit they're going to have the final one-on-one hero and villain fight at the end. And I was a bit like, we just had a huge epic action scene, and if I were going to get another one, I think I'm worried about the pacing or worried this is dragging on too long. And they do a nice sort of Marvel deflect your expectations by she just blasts him with the laser beam and then she's won it's over in like 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, for a film that has been, has got a lot of criticism for people on the internet, well, by people I do of course mean man babies, for being feminist propaganda or something. That bit at the end where he tries to go, fight me man to man, and she just blasts him and says, I've got nothing to prove to you, is one of the relatively few bits of massively explicit feminist messaging in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as feminist propaganda goes, there's not even that much of it, guys. If anything, you've wasted your shot.
Yeah, in some ways this is quite a conservative film in that the main character is like an Air Force pilot. The kind of general thrust of it is that the Air Force is great. Certainly in this film, although the Kree turn out to be a possibly slightly genocidal, war-obsessed empire, the US Air Force comes out of this quite well in that, and the US government is generally on the side of helping the plucky underdog against their tormentors. So the central thrust of this film is basically like, the Air Force is great, the US government's great, they're the good guys fighting for, truth and justice. So to claim this is some kind of mad liberal socialist propaganda trying to turn our kids into little communists is kind of a bit weird for a film which is basically about, isn't the Air Force amazing?
Yeah, but I'm sure they can't say anything massively negative about the Air Force because the Air Force has probably given them lots of nice access to the imagery and the planes and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess arguably you could read the film's general critique of the Kree as being a bit of an allegorical stab at, I don't know, past US Air Force policy, but on the other hand, it's probably a bit too vague, and realistically they're not really saying anything specific about war in the Middle East or anything. It's basically a fairly straightforward, maybe don't kill the unarmed refugees thing.
Yeah, it's quite safely couched in the kind of the sci-fi alien space war stuff, in that you can quite comfortably watch this film that basically says, like, make sure you question authority and also come away with it saying, like, yeah, but we're the good guys, right? I mean, it's a lesson about all those people in those totalitarian countries. You could quite happily let any moral message of this film fly over your head if you're really on board for the fighter jets and the bit when Captain Marvel transforms her armor from the sort of teal greeny Kree armor into the American flag, basically. Which was worked, I guess, as a kind of visual motif for the character has grown and changed.
Is it the American flag? It's sort of red.
Which is kind of red and blue.
I don't know, I guess Captain Marvel's always, in the comics, the sort of yellow star always dominates it. I never really made that colour association because there's not any yellow on the American flag, but I guess on the other hand, it is a star, so...
I think it might be the seal of the US Air Force, because there's a bit she looks at the kid wearing a US Air Force t-shirt and decides to mould her costume based on that. But anyway, the point I think about that is actually that worked quite well as a moment of, like, the character has changed after knowledge was imparted in the middle of the film. And then one of the ways that's reflected is she becomes her own person, stops wearing the generic armor that all the other Star Force soldiers wear, and wears her, armor that's colored to reflect herself rather than the faceless organization she's a part of. It shows, I'd say, the characters growing to be themselves, not just like a cog in a big machine.
Yeah, no, it's, as you say, it's a safe enough message.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fun. I think it establishes a new mythos, a new sort of corner of the Marvel Universe nicely enough. It's not an amazing film like Winter Soldier or Ragnarok, but, the next one could very easily be. This is a solid sort of first film in a series, and they could quite easily produce a masterpiece in the sequel.
Yeah, definitely.
So, in this film, as mentioned, Samuel L. Jackson is de-aged about 20 years through the magic of technology. But what other uses can we come up with for this amazing new point we've reached in digital de-aging technology, wherein apparently time no longer matters, physical space no longer matters, any actor can just be made to appear on screen through the cunning use of pixels. Alistair, what did you come up with?
Well, I guess the main use of this technology is if you can make people look younger, then I suppose you can do prequels to films that already exist with the original cast members. So I don't know, you could do an X-Men movie with Patrick Stewart playing a younger version of Xavier. It would have to only work with someone you've got a lot of footage of.
So you're saying the first primary use of digital de-aging technology is firing James McAvoy?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it looks like he's about to be fired anyway, thanks to corporate mergers.
Yeah. X-Men Dark Phoenix was likely to be his last outing as Xavier.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, luckily, before he was fired by a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it'll be better than X-Men Apocalypse, so he can go out on something of a high.
Oh, it can't possibly be any worse, although the trailers do look pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it would only really work for actors that we've got a lot of footage of them when they were younger to feed to the machine learning algorithm. Like Samuel Jackson's a good test case in that he's been in a lot of movies, over the last 30 years or so. So yeah, it would work with someone like Patrick Stewart, who we've got, again, lots of footage of them. Probably, again, lots of Next Generation Star Trek to feed to the algorithms. I don't think you could probably get away with digitally de-aging Bill Nighy, because he only really became famous when he was already in his, late 40s, early 50s.
I guess so, yeah, because basically everyone they've done this for is, as you say, a reasonably long-running actor who's with lots of old footage. Like, I think the first big prominent example of this was it Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War.
Yeah, they managed to pretty good job making him look like he was about 20.
Yeah, which was flat out weird. And then there was also, was it the guy playing Ego the Living Planet in Guardians 2? They de-aged him for a sequence.
Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
They de-aged him for the flashbacks.
And both of them obviously are long-serving actors who I'm sure they had lots of old footage to base their weird efforts on.
And they crucially started out with, we'll do some flashbacks. For the majority of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, it's Kurt Russell as he appears now. To be fair, Kurt Russell and Samuel Jackson look much younger than their actual age, because they're older than my parents. And they definitely don't look older than my parents.
I mean, yeah, but obviously we can skirt around for a while, but what's the main use for this digital de-aging technology? Vanity, kids. The answer is vanity.
Yeah. But it's good they tested it with, flashbacks in Guardians 2.
Isn't it generally... I mean, there's been a couple of articles going around about the terrifying extent to which CGI and stuff is actually being used just to make Hollywood actors look better and younger than they actually are on film.
Yeah.
Like the extent to which people like Robert Downey Jr. probably look a lot better on film than they do in reality. No offence to Robert Downey Jr., who is much more handsome than me, both in film and reality.
Yeah.
And despite being about 20 years older than me. But,
Well, they've always had makeup and hair people in anyway and things like that to make them look like, I guess, phenomenal. But now, not only they've got the magic of the gods as well, pretty much.
I mean, I suppose the appeal of these things is meant to be the chance to play God, but yeah.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we reached a point several years ago where you could make Gollum or Groot appear on screen and it look relatively convincing.
Yeah.
You still kind of assume that the people actually are just people, even though a lot of them also have gargantuan prosthetics on them. I mean, I haven't seen the movie Vice, but I have seen various clips and photos from it, and Christian Bale looks unrecognisable in that film.
Yeah. There's obviously there's these kind of legendarily transformative performances. One of the best ones is Chris Cooper in Adaptation, who Chris Cooper's main shtick is generally playing sort of army types, and he plays this sort of slightly hippie, slightly social tearaway kind of guy, and he just looks nothing like Chris Cooper. I mean, he won an Oscar, for that performance, but
I'm guessing that wasn't computer.
That was just makeup and some makeup, hair, really good acting.
The slightly scary part is the way it jumps sort of year on year, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't that long ago when we had Carrie Fisher and that other dude.
Peter Cushing.
Yes, in Rogue One. Neither of whom looked... I don't know, Peter Cushing was all right, but mostly because they clearly kept him in shadow.
Yeah.
And Carrie Fisher, to be honest, did look a bit uncanny.
Yeah, well, digitally resurrecting the dead Peter Cushing did look a little bit uncanny valley, partly because with Samuel Jackson this film, they had actual Samuel Jackson actually delivering the lines, and then just a computer going in and basically okay, so the computer would go in and just fine-tune the pixels so that he looks younger. Whereas in that, they had to actually create something closer to Groot, like a fictional character, because they had no one delivering the lines.
I mean, I don't know if this is good. I don't usually watch DVD featurettes, but I would be interested if someone did release a featurette of the original footage from this shot for this movie with, I assume, the real life Samuel L. Jackson, and the illustration of the process used to turn it into the ghost younger one. Yeah,
that would be really interesting to see. I mean, for Rogue One, they kind of, again, they do clever things to make the technology look as good as possible. Like, for Grand Moff Tarkin, he's a villain, so they have him appearing in shadowy, dark rooms a lot of the time, which works with the fact that he's a villain, but also the low light level covers up how slightly uncanny it looks. And also, they'll be like, right, we'll have him as the boss villain in the background, and we'll give the film an actual villain who can do a lot more of the scenes. A villain for this film, because that way we're not relying on this thing that the audience might start to disbelieve if they're forced to stare at it too much. And they've come from that to now Samuel Jackson being basically the second biggest part in this whole film in daylight, and a lot of the time the technology has come, like I say, it's frightening how fast it's come along, that now it can basically do a whole film when it used to be just, okay, we'll do it for a bit so you can have 5 minutes of Peter Cushing acting from beyond the grave.
Yeah, or weirdly, one 30-second scene of Carrie Fisher, who was still alive at the time of shooting, yet looks infinitely unconvincing.
Yeah.
As I say, it's weird how far the technology has come.
Yeah, it's going very fast. I think it's a bit much for me as a man to complain that, like, I feel inferior to the good looks of Robert Downey Jr., who's 53, and now he's got machines to make him look forever young, and so I feel bad about how ugly and how my hairline's receding. I mean, it's a bit much for me to complain about this. This is a problem, women have had for decades. There's been lots of scandals about how, women's fashions magazines, not only do obviously the actresses and models in those magazines have professional hair and makeup to look them great, but they do a lot of Photoshop on those shoots to make them, to make people look forever young. So the fact that now they're throwing this kind of technology at people, sort of men in their 50s and 60s in action movies, the icons of my culture, and it's making me feel like, God, I'm such a troll next to the Herculean beauty and physique of Robert Downey Jr. It's a bit rich for me to complain about this, considering the standards that this culture puts on women and how a lot of that's fake because of, like I say, it's pixel ghosts.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's the way it's moved, only because this technology started on still images, which appears to be mostly women, and has now reached film stars who appear to be mostly men. So
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, maybe it's just our turn.
Yeah, like say now it's got to the point when it can be used on the people that are in my pop culture orbit, like Samuel Jackson.
Well, yeah, and as you say, maybe we'll just have to try and take on board the psychological issues that women have been trying to take on board for decades, in that, it's just Photoshop, don't compare yourself to that, you'll drive yourself mad.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is a lot easier for me to say in a podcast than it is to actually do in reality, as I discover every time I watch the new Robert Downey Jr. movies.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, I've got pictures of Robert Downey Jr. on my laptop now because I just Googled his age. I didn't know it off the top of my head. And yeah, recent pictures of him, he looks younger than me, and he's about 20 years older. And that's not with machine learning algorithms trying to time travel back to the 90s. That's just, well, him mainly, and probably a bit of like Hollywood makeup for GQ or wherever this picture of bizarrely young looking Robert Downey Jr. I'm going to close this tab. It's making me feel bad about myself.
Okay, so what uses are there for these de-aging techniques then, making us feel bad about ourselves?
Yeah.
But in a more egalitarian, all-genders way. If anything, de-aging technology has allowed us to all feel bad about our appearances instead of it just being focused on women, and for that we should all be grateful.
Maybe that is the final feminist message of Captain Marvel, is that finally a movie that will make men feel bad about how they're ugly and old. Because, again, Samuel Jackson's much more handsome than me, and he's nearly 80.
Yeah, but it's okay. There's a time travel element that men can use as an excuse not to worry about it too much.
Yeah, fair enough.
I suppose at least every time they make a weird sequel to something where there's clearly, it's a bit strange that they're making it because the actors have clearly aged out of their roles, they could just, cancel that out now. Yeah. Like, when they make I still see it as kind of inevitable, even though it somehow hasn't happened yet, Friends revival. Ugh. They could just age them all down to how they looked a couple of years after the show ended. It's fine.
And they can set it in, like, kind of the early 2000s or mid-2000s. Friends can forever live in a world that's not plagued by the financial crash, Donald Trump, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. No one wants to watch Friends address the issues of the mid-2010s. They could just live in their weird little bubble forever.
No, they barely address the issue of the 90s.
Exactly. It'll be even more the weird escapism it was before.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I guess also this means that, actors can keep playing parts way past the point when they're too old to do them now. So, for example, maybe if we'd waited to do a Mad Max sequel in a few years' time, would they have got Mel Gibson and just de-aged him so he looked like he did back in the 80s? Or would... I
don't know if the film Mad Max Fury Road would have been as widely accepted by the whole of sort of vaguely liberal film criticism if it had starred famous racist Mel Gibson.
Yeah, I think actually probably the main reason why Mel Gibson didn't make not even a tiny cameo in Mad Max Fury Road is probably not the fact that he's probably too old to front an action franchise. It's more the fact that he's probably too racist.
I swear this is the second time we mentioned Mel Gibson in only a few episodes. Maybe we had a problem keeping him in the public consciousness.
Yeah, maybe that's the thing. I don't know.
Actually, no one listens to this podcast. What we're saying.
Certainly not Mel Gibson fans.
But if you do, hi.
Yeah.
Go away.
So yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways I guess they can use this to make things that were kind of unbelievable in the past or looked a bit dodgy kind of work better. Like,
imagine when this gets cheap enough for telly to get hold of it. Jesus.
yeah, give it
Anyway.
10. Yeah, give it 10 years. Like I say, I've said things like the T1000 was required an entire cinema budget to bring it to life for Terminator 2, but by the time they're making the Sarah Connor TV show, they could like have it in every episode because that's how much cheaper that kind of fully CGI characters have got.
And to bring it into one of our pet franchises, imagine the multi-Doctor episode you could get if you could just produce.
Oh yeah, that's a
Doctor Who age Tom Baker out of nowhere.
I think you've really hit the money there. That is where this would be valuable. Digitally resurrecting or de-aging Doctor Who's.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tom Baker isn't dead. The three before him, I believe, are Tom Baker, still with us for now.
Yeah, because Tom Baker was quite a lot younger than John Pertwee, I think. Tom Baker has also really become really old, but
as people do when affected by the passage of about 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Except now they don't have to worry about that. At least if they're film stars, that we've got huge amounts of footage of them from the past.
Thanks to the punishing length of classic era Doctor Who series, there's plenty of footage of younger Tom Baker which they can feed into the machine to produce
the digitally de-aged,
the 13 Doctors or the 14.5 Doctors or whatever.
Oh dear.
In 5-10 years' time when this technology has got cheap enough for the BBC to afford it.
Yeah, it's not going to be done on BBC budgets, I guess, anytime soon.
Well, no, that's what they said about when Doctor Who first came back. One of the main reasons they started doing Doctor Who again in 2005 is that CGI effects finally got cheap enough that they could do, like, the TARDIS and Dalek space satellites and stuff on a BBC budget without it looking so bad that you just burst out laughing.
Yeah.
I mean, it still looks quite bad in places, obviously, but yeah, it looks okay enough that they could make the show without having to feel embarrassed about it.
Yeah, exactly. But Doctor Who's always had the kind of slightly hokey charm. But yeah.
So what you're saying is I'll actually start resurrecting the dead in about 2 years' time, and it'll just look kind of terrifying.
Probably. Oh dear.
Oh, good. It's Patrick Troughton, or is it?
Yeah. Oh dear. I mean, it might make slightly crappy Hollywood film ideas kind of work a bit better. Like, I don't know have you seen Face Off, John Woo's first English language film, in which
I haven't. I did always kind of want to.
In which Nicolas Cage and John Travolta swap faces for reasons passing explanation. I mean, obviously the way they do it in the film is that they just have the actors swap the parts they're playing. But it is kind of a bit weird that like basically they kind of cut a thin amount off the front of Nicolas Cage's face and kind of stick it on top of John Travolta's face, and all of a sudden his entire physique is transformed to look like.
Does the face swapping bit actually matter, or is it just basically body swapping?
I'm pretty sure Nicolas Cage is like taller than John Travolta, but obviously they just have the actors swap playing the parts. Nicolas Cage goes from being the villain to the hero and vice versa.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's just like, I'm assuming it's meant to be a face swap, but I assume it's basically handled like a body swap.
Yeah, exactly. But the more you think about it, the more it makes no sense. But the more you think about that film in general, the more it makes no sense. And it's, just covered up by Nicolas Cage just yelling, "I'm Castor Troy!" in a very Nicolas Cage sort of way. But anyway,
the way, yeah, so instead he could just do it with wearing a green balaclava or something, and then they can actually put John Travolta's face on him.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe they'll remake Face Off, but it'll like look slightly worse. I don't know than just the way they just swap the actors over. Yeah, but they can put Nicolas Cage's face onto John Travolta's body. Does the world really need to see that?
Sure, the way you'd actually want to do that isn't like seamless CGI. The way you want to do that is to make it properly grisly and horrible, so the face is clearly sort of stuck on and slightly hanging off.
Yeah, well, he does it because he's supposed to go undercover and pretend he is the other guy, so it has to look realistic, I guess.
Does the face start peeling off at any point?
No, it does not.
Bloody hell.
There was quite a nasty bit when one of them wakes up without their face on. Anyway.
But yeah, no, you're right. I think a remake of Face Off or an extensive multi-Doctor story are the main obvious things to do.
Yeah. Well, things like, in the Mission Impossible movies, and which they borrowed from the TV show, when characters put on masks and pretend to be other characters, but obviously they just switch out the actors.
It's probably still cheaper to just switch out the actors.
Well, it's cheaper to switch out the actors, but we've got
rather than just punishingly CGI their faces onto different bodies just to cover the fact that they might have a slightly different build.
Yeah, well, but it would be more realistic.
I mean, obviously, but the logical conclusion of this is actually when it becomes cheaper to just not get the actors at all. When, the act of, say, Nicolas Cage appearing in a film, all he actually does is sign a waiver agreeing to the use of his appearance, and then they just zap his face onto a stuntman.
Yeah.
And he does the voiceover later.
There is a film with this idea. It's called The Congress, directed by Israeli director Ari Folman, who, for long running fans of the show may remember in like the sort of third episode or fourth episode, we covered his directorial debut, Waltz with Bashir, which could be my favourite film of all time. But anyway, he made a film called The Congress, starring Robin Wright of, House of Cards fame, in which, her playing herself in a sort of fictionalized universe when, in order to make some money, she sells her sort of physical appearance to a film company and they digitally kind of map her. And then basically now they can use her in as many films as they like because they've got her digitally captured. And then there's this kind of future when basically, all movie stars have been mapped and they don't act in films anymore. They're just done digitally. So maybe we're going to end up with The Congress.
Yeah, probably. You can have people who've done enough previous work and don't need to turn up anymore, and then you've got people who are tried to do enough work to the point where they don't need to have to turn up anymore. It's all one big cycle in the same way. It's just leading to not have to do any work. I mean, presumably the next step is getting voice generation to the point where you don't need them to actually speak the lines.
Yeah, like I say, various actors from The Simpsons keep threatening to walk off the show. But surely they've got every single word in the English language ever recorded from all those actors across the sort of 32 series of The Simpsons, whatever they've made so far. So if they quit, they could probably just still keep the character.
I kind of want one of them to now just to see them try it, although that would involve watching a season 33 episode of The Simpsons, and I'm probably not going to do that.
That would be a fate worse than death. They've experimented with technologies or similar technologies in the past, and sometimes to mixed results. I guess this technology must be related to the one that allows actors to act opposite themselves, which was famously done well by Arnie Hammer in The Social Network, when he played both of the Winklevi twins. It was famously done badly by Tom Hardy in Legend, when Tom Hardy acts opposite himself playing both the Cray twins. I mean, that film was terrible, but that didn't help.
We went to see that, didn't we? One of our friends just walked out halfway through.
Yeah.
Because he was so bored and disinterested in the whole affair.
That was a terrible film.
It was pretty awful, yeah. Were the Winklevi face mapping, or did they just have him play both parts and split the screen?
I believe it was done with the face mapping, in that they had Arnie Hammer and then one actor who kind of resembled Arnie Hammer with a kind of green balaclava, as you said earlier, acting opposite him, and then he was digitally added to both things. So in scenes like, when they're in the rowing simulator, it's clearly him twice on stage. I believe that's how it's done.
Yeah.
But obviously, like I say, the Winklevi are a sort of supporting part. I mean, they're not even like the main or second main character in The Social Network. They're kind of minor characters, so the fact maybe if you stared at it hard enough it would look a bit ropey doesn't really matter because they're part of the ensemble, whereas Tom Hardy on screen for 2 hours playing both leg and end in Legend, it really didn't work.
I don't know if that's your own original joke, but congratulations, that might be one of the finest jokes we've ever done.
Yeah, well, my girlfriend says it every time that film comes up, so surely all credit should go to her.
Or whoever she stole it from.
Or whoever she stole it from. So it's probably another podcast. So I apologise if that's not an original joke. But also with The Social Network, because it's got Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield in it, Arnie Hammer and Arnie Hammer's digital ghost are acting off other people, which kind of, again, makes it work better. Whereas Tom Hardy acting off his digital ghost and just that's it. In a scene, just the two of them, it doesn't really work as well because it's just slightly off kilter because of the way they've kind of taped the performances separately and kind of mashed them together. Whereas at least when you've got other actors present, it kind of works better because, like I say, you're minimizing the amount that has to be made up by mashing different bits of footage together. So if anything, what we've learned is that this sort of stuff works for supporting parts or minor characters, like I say, for a flashback bit in Guardians or Grand Moff Tarkin appearing in a couple of scenes in the shadows. But if you try to do a whole film, it doesn't work so well, with Captain Marvel maybe being the rare exception. I
think we're just advancing at a scary rate at this point. I look forward to seeing what sort of ridiculous thing they're going to do next, now that the critical consensus seems to be that they pulled it off.
Yeah.
Who knows what level of people appearing out of nowhere will be happening by 2020.
I mean, one of the things is technology does free up directors to make really bad creative decisions. Again, a thing I've read somewhere was that one of the reasons why this Star Wars prequel trilogy is so bad is that the technology advanced to the point when they could cut different actors out of different takes and put them together. So they could be like, okay, so Liam Neeson's good in this take, but Ewan McGregor's fluffed his lines. But in this take, Ewan McGregor's really good and Liam Neeson's fluffed his lines. So we can just like digitally lift Liam Neeson out of the take he's good in and put him into the take that he's bad in, which basically meant in the past, they just have to keep shooting it until both actors nailed it. And the problem with this is that even though they've both done a good take, they're not from the same take, so they're not riffing off each other. There's not that connection between the actors. They're kind of weirdly disjointed. So you kind of, which is one of the reasons why just the performances just kind of didn't mesh so well in Phantom Menace and other films like that. So, but it's only because that was only possible because of advances in technology. And also, Jar Jar Binks was only possible because of advances in technology, when at least Chewbacca was an actor there acting. So hopefully this doesn't free up directors to make terrible artistic decisions.
I am excited to see, and we maybe don't know this for a year or two, who is out there watching Captain Marvel and the fact that the Samuel L. Jackson stuff mostly works and thinking, wow, imagine what I could do with this. Revisit this in a couple of years and see what beyond the grave disasters have been visited upon us.
Yeah.
Will it actually be Doctor Who the movie starring all 13 and a half of them? Who knows?
That's probably the most likely outcome.
It would save them that one line they had to put into every Doctor Who multi-Doctor story explaining why the old ones are old.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the combination of they'd have to digitally resurrect the first three, a la Peter Cushing from Rogue One, and then digitally de-age everyone else.
Certainly all the classic series Doctors at this point would probably need to be de-aged to some extent.
Yeah, the first 7 up to 1989 in the Wilderness years.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, we got that to look forward to. Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you have already subscribed, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice so that other people can find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of this podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
Or you could also follow us on social media, where we are at MFV Podcast on Twitter and Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, where you can find most of the information about whether the next episode is going to be late, to be honest, and occasionally retweeted pop culture opinions. And you can find more from me specifically at NickMB on Twitter or nickbryan.com on the wider internet, including information about my comics, novels, and, again, pop culture opinions.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we'll be reviewing Us from Jordan Peele, the director of Get Out. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Bye. No good outtakes this fortnight, so here is the only sound result for Captain Marvel from the Freesound website. Inspiring.